Hello, this is Dr. Llewellyn Eisen, and this is the second half of the Christians and Roman Society class on gender. And in this class session, we're going to talk about the text that I asked you to read. We're not going to discuss every single one of the homework questions. Some of those were for you to reflect on, and I will read them when I read and grade your assignments. So the first of the three different readings for this section was that I asked you to read some passages from the New Testament. Some of those passages were from the Gospel accounts, and others were from some Pauline and pseudo-Pauline texts. You had two choices. You could, focus on writing a summary that addresses some of the themes or interactions either between Jesus and women or between or within Paul's letters to the Romans, Galatians, Corinthians, and an anonymous letter to Timothy. So we'll address both of these because you've all made different choices. Among the distinct types of relationships that Jesus has with women, one that really stands out is his relationship with his mother, who is clearly a prominent figure in the gospel accounts. In the story of the wedding of Cana, we encounter Jesus and his mother at a wedding where they've run out of wine. And Jesus' mother, in this account, according to the author of this gospel, is the instigator of the activity in which Jesus will engage, activity that's considered very often as the first of his benevolent activities or miracles. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, according to the text, they have no wine, and Jesus said to her, what concern is that to you and to me? In other words, why does that matter? My hour has not yet come. And his mother says to the servants, do whatever he tells you, right? She's still his mother. Do it, take care of it. So Jesus is here being instructed by his mother to engage in certain actions, and in fact, he does take them. We also see in some of the accounts that Jesus allowed women to touch him. And this is a passage that we read when we were looking at our introduction to the Jesus movement. So this image, or these images, should be familiar to you all. You should instantly know what's going on here. This is the woman who was hemorrhaging and who needed medical care, and as we know, received something of some kind of medical care from Jesus, even if what that meant was that others were not to regard her as impure or as repugnant. That he allowed women to touch him is very significant. Women are seen in the gospel accounts as examples of faith. This is a batik print of Jesus at dinner. And here, this woman here, this is the passage where the woman washes his feet with her hair. A very moving passage. He spoke to women in public. This is a passage that we've also discussed, where he went to get some water. There was a woman drawing water at the well, and we talked about this. This is a slightly flirtatious conversation, rather jovial, I would call it. And he's engaging in this sort of casual banter with this woman in a public place, much to the scandal of his followers. He taught women in rabbinical style. Here we have another modern image of Jesus, pictured here, and a woman at his feet, which is the traditional posture of a student and their teacher. That the woman sat at Jesus' feet is an indication that he viewed her as his student. In the gospel accounts of Jesus' activity with women, he only used women as positive examples, not as negative examples. this modern fresco here shows us the image of the woman who put in everything from Mark 12. Jesus said, I tell you the truth, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth. She gave out of her poverty. So in cases like this, he's only using women as examples of positive behavior. These are good things that good people do. Additionally, in a very controversial passage, actually, a woman is understood in this passage as worthy of engagement. This is a Syrophoenician woman, again, a modern example, a modern image. This is from Mark 7. The woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin. She begged Jesus to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, quote, let the children be fed first. It's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. So this is a way of saying to her, no, I'm not here for you. But she answered him, quote, sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. Quote, then he said to her, quote, for saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter. End quote. So I'm not convinced that, as many scholars have written, that this is Jesus trying to test her. I think it is evidence of the social context in which Jesus operated, that he operated among his kin, and she was not his kin. But nevertheless, that she clapped back proved that she wasn't just going to give up so easily. Beautiful modern icon of the Syrophoenician woman. Additionally, we read in these texts that women functioned as Jesus' patrons, which we have already discussed, funding his activity, and that, of course, they are shown as examples of fidelity. Fides, right? A word that we've dealt with much. And this is usually through their presence at the crucifixion when others are not there. Additionally, women are in all of the gospel accounts, understood as the first witnesses to an empty tomb. And beyond the crucifixion event, both the Gospels and the Pauline accounts, to which we'll turn here in a minute, indicate that women are active evangelists. So as we think about the types of engagements that Jesus had with women, if you think about it, the gospel accounts aren't particularly lengthy. We have 4 canonical gospels. We have additional non-canonical gospels. We've read some, we'll read more. There's a lot of activity here between Jesus and women. And so this is, and there goes my dog. This is fairly abnormal in terms of just the theme of the presence of women. That's worth paying attention to. But we need to pay attention to some other things. So let's take a moment and turn to the letters that Paul wrote and the passages that I asked you to read. What should be very clear in those brief passages is that women are Paul's co-workers. They are co-authoritative, and they are very active participants in the liturgy. The Pauline texts that we know Paul wrote acknowledge women's roles in early evangelical activity and in support for the Jesus movement. Just looking at one of those texts alone can give us a good indication about the activity of women. We can see that in the Romans passage, there were 11 mentions of women, and of those 11 mentions, several of them give us additional information about who the women were. Phoebe, who is a deacon of the church, Prisca or Priscilla, who is a fellow worker with Aquila, who has a church at their house. Mary, who worked very hard. Junia, who is, notice this, outstanding among the apostles. So we have a woman who is noted as an apostle. We have Tryphena and Tryphosa, women who worked hard. Persis, another woman who's worked very hard. The mother of Rufus, who has been a mother to me. Julia, the sister of Nereus and Olympus, about whom we have no information, but still individuals who are noted. So the challenges come in passages like this, which was also assigned for you. In this letter, which was not written by Paul, the author writes, "Let a woman learn in silence in full submission. I do not allow a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. They should be silent. For Adam was made first, and then Eve. And Adam did not go astray, but the woman went astray and entered into transgression. But she will be saved through bearing children if they remain in faith and love and holiness with modesty." So that's kind of troubling, right? That we have these women who are seen as, again, co-authoritative, as co-workers in the activity of the Jesus movement, and then this. And so this can be very challenging for thinking about how women operated within early Christian communities. In general, the only conclusion that we can draw is one of ambivalence. In late antiquity, women are a gift and they are a curse. They are courageous and they are weak. They are scholarly, but they are ignorant. They are chaste, but they are lustful. They are vessels of honor, but they are vessels of sin. And this leaves us with more questions than answers about the role of women and activity of women within New Testament texts. So we have two more texts that we need to think about, three actually. The Rodney Stark passage, the Rodney Stark chapter, and then some primary sources. This is the point in class at which I would stop and ask for questions, but since I can't do that, since we're doing this in a distance learning format, I'm going to have to, there goes my dog again, depend on you to email me questions and put them in your homework for me to answer later. So let's turn to our Rodney Stark text. So Stark's fundamental questions include: how does a religious movement grow? How or why does it succeed? What does it provide for its members that other groups don't provide? What does it support within the group that keeps people invested? And then how do social factors play a role in the development of a religion? So he uses these questions to consider how and why women contributed to the rise of Christianity. So the question that I asked you, in addition to that, is to identify how Christian ethics of the body will support the role of women, how primary and secondary conversion will contribute to greater numbers of Christians, and how the issue of status plays into the equation. Finally, to offer, if you have one, a critique of his claims. Now, I'm going to rely on you to answer these questions within your homework, but I am going to say a few things about the context, the historical context about which Stark is writing. So there were contraceptives in the classical world and in late antiquity, the same as there are today, although they were largely more lethal. Instruments for performing abortions were detailed in the Stark book, but additionally, there were also ingestible means of inducing an abortion, and unfortunately, this very often resulted in the death of the pregnant woman as well as the death of the fetus. So, Stark's argument for why and how women contributed to the rise of Christianity are largely, he argues, ethical. Okay? Ethical reasons. Bans against abortions and also bans against things like infanticide meant that, according to Stark, that Christian subcultures developed substantial numbers of women. As a result of there being more Christian women, he argues there will be more babies born into Christian families. Now, I think that math does add up, but I don't think it's correct to assume that because you have more Christian women that those women are more fertile. But I do see his point that if those women are prevented from employing the means to dispose of a baby, then they are more likely to carry a child to term. So I do understand that math. So if you have, as Stark said, more Christian women who are not engaging in behaviors or being forced, let's be clear, being forced to engage in behaviors that can harm their fertility, whether it's ingesting or through an instrumentation, you will have more babies being born into Christian families. And these women, as we have seen in previous texts, have higher status. Some of them do, in their communities. And we've seen this. We've seen this in some of the texts that we've read. Additionally, Stark argues there's something known as secondary conversion. And secondary conversion is something that happens when a person is married to someone who is affiliated with a particular faith profession, and then the person who is not affiliated with it is brought along. So in this case, here I'm introducing you already to Queen Clotilde, who is a Christian woman. We'll meet her again later in the semester. And her husband Clovis is not Christian, and she will, in time, convince him of what she would argue is the rightness of the Christian claims. So secondary converts via mixed marriages is another way in which women will contribute to the rise of Christianity. So if we were in class at this point, we would talk more about this text and we would take questions. I would take questions, but we're not in class. We are online. So let's continue in our discussion of the text with Saint Thecla. So the account of Thecla is a 2nd century text. It is an anonymous text, but most likely it has a male authorship. Thecla's title is equal to the Apostles, and we can see, having read the Pauline text, that it is not uncommon for a woman to be addressed this way. We saw that Mary Magdalene in the Eastern Orthodox tradition is also titled equal to the Apostle. And this text created a culture of imitation, which I like to think of as a pre-first wave feminism. Thecla is not a historical person. We don't actually have historical evidence that Thecla existed, but nevertheless, what we do have historical evidence of is that we have women engaging in these behaviors. And so I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, is that of which we have historical evidence is the types of behaviors in which Thecla is engaging. So in terms of the homework question, Thecla establishes a powerful model for women in early Christianity and is one of the most popular female saints in Christian history, even up to today. How does this text present her as a model beyond expected social and sexual roles? The first thing I would say is that she's entirely self-governing. She makes decisions on behalf of herself. And so this is certainly one way in which she is violating social norms with respect to her kin. Additionally, and something that I find particularly magnificent about Tekla is that she ignores rejection. On multiple occasions, she ignores the rejection that she receives from Paul in her desire to be one of his followers. Additionally, and here she is really taking the advice of RuPaul in that she is creating a new kin for herself. If in fact by being self-governing, she has lost her kin because she has violated the norms that are expected of her. She is creating a new kin among those who are also engaged in the task of discipleship. And then finally, I guess related to point one about being self-governing, she really is her own source of authority. And you see this most clearly when she takes it upon herself to baptize herself, which is one of the most surprising and sort of interesting pieces in this text, that baptism requires an agent. And she is her own agent as well as the recipient of baptism, which is just a fascinating detail in this text. The other question that I ask about this text is what enables her to take the actions that she takes? In other words, what is the source of her authority? I just said seconds ago that she is in fact the source of her own authority, but also the fact that she's rejecting marriage, and with marriage, sexual activity, and with sexual activity, parenting. The source of her authority is her chastity, her refraining from a social norm of marriage and linking herself with her family and another family. So, in terms of broader issues of women in apostolic Christianity, what can the Acts of St. Tekla tell us? What insight can we have about women in apostolic Christianity from this text? Some aspects of Christianity validate the female body. Some aspects, not all, okay? Paul certainly supports her decision, even though, not in a way that is effusive. In time, he seems to be convinced. And her decision to reject marriage, to reject childbearing, is certainly validated not just by the people that Tekla draws around her, but also by whoever wrote the account, and also by whoever appreciates the account, whoever venerates this account as something that's an important story. This text can also teach us that there are some aspects of Christianity that provide liberation from marriage. This was not an option for most people, right? Remember in our brief study of religion in late antiquity, we saw that the option for virginity was only through the Vestal virgins, and women didn't get to choose if they were a Vestal or not. And somebody might want to be a Vestal, but if they were not of an upper ordered family, that wasn't going to happen. So in this account, for 2nd century Christian women, we learned that chastity provides access to freedom for some women. Additionally, chastity prepares some women for the work of baptizing, for teaching, for praying, and for prophesying. I'm sorry that the image there, Paul and Tekla, is over the words. I will read that again. Chastity prepares one for the work of baptizing, teaching, praying, and for engaging in prophecy. So the final task for this text asked you to put Stark in conversation with the Tekla text. Here are a few artistic images of Tekla. Here we have Tekla here, and here we have Paul here. Here we have Tekla on the front of, this is an ampulla. It's like a little vessel for water or oil. Here's Tekla in the water. And here's Tekla with the lions. She's one of the most prominent saints visually in late antiquity, and she is one of the most popular early Christian figures. She continues to be an important figure of resistance for women and for Christians in general. So put Stark in conversation with the Tekla text. How does his research help you understand the text better? I'm not going to tell you the answer to this. I'm looking forward to reading it in your homework. So the last text for us to consider briefly is Tertullian. Tertullian is an important North African Latin theologian, absolutely brilliant, but also probably one of the biggest misogynists in the ancient world. His text on the dress of women is difficult, but it's important. It's an important one at his age as well as in ours. What is his argument? I asked you to figure out, and what is his evidence, and what is the fallout that we are left with? So Tertullian's argument is that because women have descended from Eve, and because Eve messed everything up, the result is that women must be held accountable for Eve's transgression and therefore must be told how to behave. He writes in that, I believe it's on the second page in the Tertullian, in the Ehrman reading, do you not know that you are each an Eve? The sentence of God on this sex of yours lives in this age. The guilt must of necessity live too. You are the devil's gateway. You are the unsealer of that forbidden tree. You are the first deserter of that divine law. You are she who persuaded him whom the devil was not valiant enough to attack. So in this case, Tertullian is saying, men are so valiant that the devil was actually, not brave enough to attack a man. You destroyed so easily God's image, man, not you. On account of your desertion, or your desert, that is death, even the Son of God had to die. So Jesus had to die because of Eve. And do you think about adorning yourself over and above your tunics of skin? Sort of hard to come back from that, isn't it? Right? And that's just 3 lines. So some concluding thoughts. Women, despite Tertullian, despite the Pseudo-Pauline letters, despite Plato and Aristotle, women are present in early Christian communities. They're visible, they're present, and they're prominent. They function as deacon and deaconesses. They are evangelists, they are teachers, they are scribes and translators. They are conversation partners and theologians. They are martyrs, and they are patrons of monasteries, of churches. They're patrons of teachers and theologians and philosophers, and they're even patrons of Jesus. We have evidence that women were active in the development of Christianity in all the ways I've just mentioned. But we have to keep in mind that present does not equal equal. Present does not equal equal. As Christianity organized, as it responded to pre-Orthodox, sort of universal church structure, women became silenced as Christianity organized. Nevertheless, women worked around these boundaries to become powerful leaders, patrons, and figures of resistance. If we were in class, I would be asking you for your questions, but we're not. We're doing this remotely. So I look forward to reading the questions that you have in your homework and hearing your reflection, reading your reflections on the Stark and Tertullian readings. Thank you. Have a great day.